Hi, good morning. So we are the group 4 of BSA 3B-1, and we are assigned chapter 9, which is all about documenting issues. Okay, so first of all, what is the CCCER or the 5C model? So this is an acronym that is widely used by internal auditors to document internal audit findings. So it consists of the following: C for criteria, C for condition, C for cause, E for effect, and R for recommendation. It is also used when there is discrepancy between the criteria and existing conditions, and this model provides a structured, reliable, simple, yet effective framework to document these conditions. So my groupmate will be discussing more of this CCCER model in the following slides.
So, as was mentioned by the first reporter, which is the CCCER or the 5C model, which consists of five. So, we have here the first one, which is the criteria. So, let's define what is a criteria. It is the performance standards or expectations set by the relevant stakeholders. It is used in making the evaluation or verification and consists of the expected performance. So I'm thinking that we are all familiar with criteria, but when it comes to operational auditing, auditors must agree with managers what operations are intended to accomplish and how they judge performance. So planning and control system may be a focal point on monitoring performance, and the organizational data may be so. So formal performance standards must be established and the reliability of data must be checked. So next we have here the performing financial review. So as you can see, we have here three. The first one is the criteria would consist of relevant accounting and financial standards. So it should dictate the recording of transactions for financial statement purposes. The second one is criteria can be established through external expectations and internal expectations. So, dun muna tayo sa external expectations, like those encapsulated in government laws and regulations. While the second one, which is the internal expectations, those defined in the organization's policy and procedures that govern employee conduct, the use of company resources and procedures describing how control activities or operational activities within a process should be performed. Then lastly, we have criteria can be a combination, such as those reflected in contracts and SLAs. So for the next one or the second one, we have the condition. So condition simply as siya yung result ng after ma-apply ng mga auditing procedures. Siyempre, sino ba ang gumagawa nun, which is the auditor. So the definition, the condition refers to what the auditor discovered as a result of applying auditing procedures. Also, it is the factual evidence that the internal auditor found during the review. So, hindi ko na siya masyadong i-explain since self-explanatory naman din siya. Basta pag narinig niyo yung condition, siya yung result after ma-apply ng mga auditing procedures ng auditor. And factual evidence din siya. So next is the internal audit procedures includes first gathering testimony, then reviewing documents, observing the work conditions and dynamics, then performing calculations of important figures. So as you can see, we have here a take note. So para siyang key takeaways para mas matandaan yung difference between the criteria and the condition. So criteria are what should be in place while the condition is what is in place. So para hindi rin kayo nalilito what is the difference between criteria and condition, pwedeng ito na nga din yung tandaan nyo. Pag criteria, yun nga, what should be in place while the condition is what is in place. Then, yung remaining na tatlo dun sa may 5C model will be discussed by the next reporter.
Hi. So to continue the discussion of the CCCR model for documenting audit findings, I will discuss the cause and effect of the CCCR model. So first, defining the cause. So the cause is the reason condition exists. That cause explains why there is a difference between expected and actual conditions. Next is getting to the root cause of a problem is not always easy. That root cause is the crucial part of the internal auditor. So there are three methodologies that would help operational auditors find a find the root cause of operational deficiencies. So first is the 5 whys. So ask why until you get to that root cause of the issue. And then second is the cause and effect diagram. So this is also known as a fishbone. And the example is this template at the right. That graphic clearly depicts all of the likely causes of the problem, which allows you to understand where the problem began. And then last is the drill down. So, to acquire a deeper understanding of the situation, break it down into smaller pieces or sections. It is also possible na we could use data analytics. Next is the effect. So effect constitutes the consequence of the condition identified. So the outcome of the identified conditions is effect. It refers to the risk or exposure that an organization, program, process, or others will experience as a result of a circumstance that does not meet the requirements. And then the effect is not simply resulting from the problem itself. So what? So what though? The question is so what? So is a useful question to ask while documenting the proper effect and ensuring that the auditor has found a finding worthy of inclusion in the report. So why should someone be concerned about that condition? If the auditor is unable to describe the significance of the finding, he or she may have trouble persuading the auditee that not an issue exists, which requires their attention and correction. So furthermore, the auditor's inability to express the result generally indicates a preference rather than a genuine problem. And then the last is the effect. It is extremely helpful for the auditor to quantify as much as possible the effect of the finding. So this will make the conclusion more persuasive and convincing, as well as act as a valuable measure for determining whether or not the conclusion is valid. This is also alert the readers to the necessity of paying attention to the report's following point suggestions. Again, the cause and effect diagram serves as a very useful supplement to the CCCR model used by many internal auditors to document internal audit findings. The condition or problem statement is placed as the head of the fish. Ito yung kanina, is the head of the fish. And the bones represents the causes. Using the cause and effects diagram, it will help the internal auditors make recommendations more valuable, precise, and useful to the audit clients.
So after identifying the criteria, condition, cause, and effect, we can now make recommendations that stands for the R in the CCCER model or the 5C model. To define recommendation, it is the action or collection of actions that, if successfully implemented, will neutralize the cause. And when we say neutralize the cause, it means we render the cause ineffective or harmless. Making recommendations can also stop the negative effect of the discrepancy, and it can restore the condition of the operation to its desirable state. So for example, let's say the management set a criterion of producing 10,000 units for this month. However, at the end of the month, they learned that the factory was only able to produce 8,200 units. So there is a discrepancy between the criterion of producing 10,000 units and the condition wherein the factory was only able to produce 8,200 units. So there is a difference of 1,800 units. Now, with further investigation, they learned that this discrepancy was caused by, let's say, outdated machineries or the lack of manpower. And in effect, they weren't able to deliver the good on time, or they were unable to meet the deadline. So with this finding, the internal auditor can make good recommendations to the management. For this situation, let's say they can recommend to the management to buy new machineries or to upgrade their machines and hire more workers so that they can meet the expectations or the standards set by the management. So making recommendations, the effectiveness of the recommendations depends on the auditor fully capturing the details about each of the components of the CCCER model or the 5C model. So auditors should expound and explain clearly each components of the said model, as it will make the findings more convincing and persuasive. Also, with a detailed information about the components of the 5C model, it will make the readers, or it will enable the readers to reach or arrive at the same conclusion as the auditor who identified the deficiency or the discrepancy. So, recommendations should also be cost-effective when correcting the errors. Remember that the benefit should exceed the cost. That is why care must be applied so that the cost of correcting the problems or the cost of correcting the errors should not exceed exposure or the loss the deficiency is identifying. That is also why internal auditors should consider the principles of effective processes when making recommendations. So an example of an effective or a principle of effective processes is the principles of mistake proofing, or also known as the POCA-yoke. So POCA-yoke was developed in the 1960s by Shingeo Shingo, a Japanese industrial engineer who was considered as the world's leading expert in manufacturing practices and the Toyota production system. So POCA-yoke focuses on mistake-proofing a process or activity so an operation cannot be performed incorrectly. So humans make mistakes, that's a given. However, mistakes can cause problems in the operation. That is why the principles of mistake proofing, or simply the POCA-yoke, is very helpful, as these are mechanisms that can eliminate errors by effectively making it impossible to make mistakes in a given process. So POCA-yoke includes or is composed of 6 principles. The first principle is the principle of elimination. So with elimination, we no longer do the problematic activity or product. We eliminate the error or the possibility of error by redesigning the product or the process so that the problematic task is no longer necessary. Elimination is also arguably considered as the best course of action in mistake proofing. So the second principle is prevention, where we make sure that there can never be done wrong, or the process can never be done wrong. So with prevention, we design or we engineer a product that makes it nearly impossible to make mistakes. So the third principle is replacement, where we use something better. So in replacement, we replace or we substitute the problematic product or process to aim or for a more reliable one to ensure or improve the consistency of the procedure or the process. The fourth one is facilitation. And with facilitation, we make tasks easier to perform by employing techniques, color coding items, combining steps, so on and so forth. So examples of these are simplifying the forms, clarifying instructions, automating date entries, and choosing from pre-selected values, which can improve the accuracy and speed of the operation or the process. The fifth principle is detection, where we notice what is going wrong and we stop it. So this can be done by identifying errors beforehand or before further processing occurs, so that the user can quickly correct the error or the problem. And then lastly, we have mitigation, where we don't let the situation get too bad or get any worse. With mitigation, we seek to minimize the effects of the error. So for example, we use circuit breakers that shut off when there are electrical overload. When there is an electrical overload or a short circuit, and in a service environment, we have the authorization limits, which also provides similar protections.
Thanks to Ms. De La Torre, now we have an idea what a recommendation is. Findings and recommendations must show how important the problem is, that the readers or the board must take it seriously and do appropriate actions with it. I am Tina Irish Santos, and I will help you today how to make your findings and recommendations persuasive. Well, first, quantify as much as possible. We do not want our readers to be confused. What is the real problem that needs to be taken care of? We must present them with complete and accurate facts. These can be in the form of monetary terms, number of units, percentage of transactions affected, how many are affected, and how long the issue has been occurring. Next, we have to make sure our findings are significant, and we must consider the costs or benefits that were involved. We do not want to bombard our readers with so many information. Just keep the important ones. We need to eliminate those that are irrelevant to those that are not. Costs or benefits are important in a recommendation because we have to let them know the possible costs or how much the business may spend and the benefits in the end to drive the motivation. Lastly, use appropriate language. We should know who our readers are so that we will know how to compose or write the recommendation. Some people just want a short and simple but concise report. Our time is very precious. We do not need to make such lengthy reports just to show off our knowledge. Of course, we want our readers to easily comprehend the message of our findings and recommendations. So avoid using too much complex words, jargons, and numerous acronyms.
So I'm going to tackle about the comprehension level of audit report recipients. So first, what is a comprehension? It is the action or capability of understanding something. Some won't have the least comprehension of what I'm trying to do. So based on my research, an recipient audit can be an audit with high reasonable assurance, a review engagement with moderate assurance, or specified auditing procedures with no assurance. So number one, Use a reasonable report format. Audit report formats have changed and many organizations are now submitting 1 to 3 page reports. Since audit recipients typically don't have a lot of time available, they cannot read lengthy reports. Furthermore, by making the format simple using color, bullets, graphs, and diagrams, it can make it easier and faster for readers to follow. Another benefit is that some of these simplified formats reduce the amount of time auditors must spending writing the report itself. So, like for example, pag magre-report ka, make it short but understandable since audit report recipients don't have a lot of time. So, gawin mo ng worth it yung pakikinig nila sa'yo and make it creative para mas maging attentive sila sa'yo. Number 2, order of importance. Internal auditors should carefully examine the totality of the findings presented in the report and make sure they are presented in order of importance. More significant findings should be presented first and the remaining issues in descending order. An audit manager told me early in my audit career to put findings in descending order because if the reader runs out of time and you can't read the entire report, you want that person at least read the most important points, which could be at the beginning. So, ideas or steps are prioritized by the writer or speaker according to a hierarchy of value. When using the order of importance pattern of organizations, information can be structured from most important to least important or least important to most important. Number 3, compressing findings. Audit reports are getting shorter. One of the ways to accomplish this is to compress the findings. This means consolidating some findings so there are fewer in total. This practice does not eliminate the findings. It merely groups them. In fact, I have found that sometimes what I thought was a finding was actually the symptom of something else. So, compressing them results in the real problem being presented, the previous findings becoming examples or manifestations of the larger issues. And the recommendation gets to the root cause of the problem itself. One way to do this is to use an affinity diagram. So, from the word itself, compressing, i-compress mo yung mga i-report mo na parang kukunin mo lang yung mga mahalagang bagay para yun ang mas maintindihan nila. So, what is a affinity diagram? So, affinity diagram is this affinity diagram organizes a large number of ideas into their natural relationships. It is the organized output from a brainstorming session. Number 4, too lengthy. Similar to the observation related to the length of the audit report, sometimes the length of the findings itself excessive. Findings should be succinct without losing any necessary details. Internal auditors should be careful not to elaborate excessively on the issue or provide unnecessary details. So, sinasabi dito is kapag, like for example, pag magre-report ang mga internal auditors, hindi nila kailangan pahabain pa or kung ano pang sasabihin nila sa ire-report nila kasi hindi naman yung ang mahalaga. Dapat, pag magre-report ka, maikli, pero gaya ng sinabi ko sa use a reasonable report format, dapat mahalagang bagay lang para maging worth it yung pagre-report mo kahit saglit lang. So, number 5 is proper tone. Some internal auditors forget that the purpose of most internal audit report is to convince the reader to take action, not to be accusatory or demeaning to those whose actions fail to meet performance expectations, except for reports describing egregious conditions where the tone must be commensurate to the severity to the problems. Reports should balance the nature and magnitude if the problem with the tone used when presenting it. In general, it is the best to be constructive, positive, and factual in the report and present any opinion on the matter in a level-headed manner. So, for example, syempre, as an internal auditor, pag magre-report ka, kailangan ang gagamitin mo mga words ay yung formal kasi mga formal din ang makakausapin mo. And ang proper tone, yung boses mo ba, kailangan, syempre, hindi naman biro yung mga pagre-reportan mo. Kailangan, ang boses na gagamitin mo is yung malambing lang, mahina. Hindi naman sobrang hina, pero dapat yung, pag narinig nila yung boses na yun, yung parang, ay, nakikinig ako dito since ganito yung boses niya, magalang siya, ganon.
So I'm going to tackle about using quantitative methods to improve the quality and impact of audit findings. What do we mean by audit findings? Audit findings are audit observations, details the facts that we found in the course of the audit engagement. Few things with facts when it comes to arguing for a particular course of action, especially when the internal auditor collects reliable data, performs appropriate analysis, and formulate conclusions based on these related facts. It is difficult for others to contradict or ignore the communication. And also, the facts that gathered should be sufficient and appropriate, so that they convincing and objective enough that the readers of internal audit report could reach the same conclusion as you do. The veracity of the auditors is based on quantitative information. Quantitative results will improve the impact of audit findings, such as systematic data analysis, aim for reliability, and hypothesis testing. More qualitative elements can be included as well, but they may not carry as much weight and could be subject to auditee challenges. To address this, internal auditors are encouraged to collect objective information to support subjective matters. If a motivation is concerned anecdotally, meaning according to or by means of individuals' behavior, or by observing the mood of workers or the diligence with which they perform their duties. And also, internal audit may want to consider interviewing multiples of workers and documenting the information as the basis of any employee moral of dissatisfaction. A survey conducted by internal auditor, HR, or third-party provider can also add quantitative elements of this topic. Next is characteristic of presenter. Persuasion can also be achieved by appealing to the character of the presenter. The presenter or auditor must be trustworthy, honest, intelligent, or other credibility. These are the desirable characteristics of an auditor. By delivering outstanding results, accuracy, professionalism, and being helpful to organization. The third approach based on emotion. Getting an emotional reaction based on expressing feelings on a subject, scar tactics showing pity or flattery.
Persuasion and diversion. First, let's discuss what is persuasion. Persuasion means to cause someone to do something through reasoning or argument. Um, Kumbaga, being persuaded. Yan. You did something, you do something dahil na-persuade ka, dahil sa reason, dahil sa argument na binigay na naibato nila sa inyo. Yeah. It's persuasion. Second is diversion. An instance of turning something aside from its course. Kumbaga is changing topic. For example, usapan, politics, ayaw mong pag-usapan ng politics, then you change the topic. Yeah, that's diversion. You do something or you inserted something to change the topic. So, what are the techniques used to persuade, distract, and divert? As much as internal auditors should know how to increase their ability to be persuasive, they should also remember that sometimes audit clients want to persuade the auditor as well. So what are the techniques? Number one is repetition. By repeating an argument often enough, the perpetrator hopes that the frequent repetition creates legitimacy. In real life, at working. Yan, example natin at working. Paulit-ulit na sinasabi kapag nalalapitan ka, yayaman ka, marami nang yumaman, pag sinubukan mo, yayaman ka, ganon. Diba? Yun lang yun, pinakatumatak, yayaman. That's repetition. But always remember that if someone says it many times, that doesn't make it true. Hindi porket nasabi na maraming beses, totoo na. We should always fact-check ba kumbaga yun. Next is will of majority. Yan, sabihin natin na persuade ka dun sa repetition nila. There is another technique that they use. It is the will of majority. Yan, this gives the person's argument the aura of legitimacy. Paano ba nila ginagamit to? For example, is seminar. Seminar ka lang, networking. They will show you someone na magto-talk sa inyo na yumaman na daw sila, dahil sa networking. Hindi lang isa, dalawa, or tatlo ang magto-talk sa inyo about networking. Kumbaga to convince you more. That's the will of majority. They use someone na yumaman na daw to convince you. And next is generalization. Generalization, even if everyone is doing it, that doesn't make it acceptable. Kumbaga generalize. Yan. Generalize na ginagawa ni ganito, yumaman si ganito, yumaman si ganyan dito. So, na-generalize na. Kaya yaman ka rin. Parang ganun eh. Diba? Yumaman naman si ganito, yumaman naman si ganyan dahil sa networking. Kaya yaman ka na rin panigurado. Yun. That's yun na yung ibig sabihin ng even if everyone is doing it, that doesn't make it acceptable. Hindi porket yumaman siya sa networking, yaman ka na rin. That's an act of being persuasive. Last is creating information. Itong creating information, it is a summary. For me, it is a summary of techniques that is used to persuade someone. Yeah. Some individuals attempt to present a different version of the truth. This can be done by excluding some information that, if known, would have resulted in a different opinion. When someone creates an information, they repeat something para tumatak doon sa utak ng tao. May paulit-ulit siyang sasabihin, keyword, para tumatak sa utak ng tao para mapaniwalang totoo. When someone is creating information, they use the will of majority. Bibigyan kanila ng, kumbaga, magbibigay ng legitimacy doon sa information na binibigay nila. And when someone is creating information, they generalize something. Generalize nila. Parang kanina na example is, ginawa naman ni ganito, ginawa naman ni ganyan, bakit hindi mo rin gawin? That's part of creating information. So these four are the techniques that is used to persuade someone. Next is criteria on presenting information auditees. Criteria on presenting information to auditees, management, and board of directors. Earlier, one of my groupmate discussed about characteristic of a presenter. Ito naman is criteria on presenting. Criteria to present the evidence to the management and board of directors. Number 1 is verifiable. Your evidence should be verifiable. All results should be based on reliable facts, figures, and documents that others can inspect independently. Kumbaga is, when they fact check it, kapag binerify nila yon is, nag-a-arrive lang siya sa iisang conclusion. Dun lang sa nireport mo na yon. Iisa lang ang pinaka-conclusion niya. Second is transparency. When there is a legitimate need and authority to do so, the facts, figures, and documents should be available for review by others. Transparency. Dapat dun sa evidence or sa document na pre-present mo is wala kang tinatago. Lahat dapat andoon. Transparent ka dapat sa kung anong meron doon. Dapat pwede siyang i-review ng kahit sino. Kahit sinong part or member ng management, ng board of directors. Kasi wala kang tinatago. Next is sufficiency. So the facts, figures, and documents used during the interview should be enough to convince an equally qualified, prudent, and unbiased person. Sufficient. Sapat. And sapat yung laman ng document or evidence na pinipresent mo to convince the board, the management, and your co-auditors. Next is reliability. The facts, figures, and documents you should use should be free from tampering or significant and unexplainable quality variances, prepared by suitably qualified individual or system, and provided time for review and analysis. Reliable. Reliable dapat yung evidence, yung document na pinipresent mo. Yun, reliability. Next is relevancy. This connects with the reliability. Relevant. And the facts, figures, and documents used during review should be applicable based on the scope of the review and the objectives of the organization, program, process. Relevant dapat yung topic or relevant dapat yung document mo dun sa topic na pine-present mo. Hindi ka pa pwede mag-present na unrelevant. Kumbaga ang layo dun sa topic, dun sa document na meron ka. Yan. Last is usefulness. The facts, figures, and documents used should help the organization, program, or process improve its operation and enhance its ability to achieve its objective. Siyempre, you would not report something or present something that is unuseful. Para saan pat in-report mo yon if it doesn't help the organization, di ba? That's the main thing. If you want to report something, make sure that it is useful.
Hi, so for the last lesson that I will be discussed on chapter 9 is all about developing useful, pragmatic, and effective recommendations for corrective actions. The standards state that internal auditors must communicate the result of engagements. This is probably the most obvious and intuitive of all the standard, where the title almost says it all. If internal audit does not communicate the results of work effectively, then it will find it incredibly difficult to demonstrate how it achieves its purpose for being to add value contributes to the improvement of the organization's operations. So communications is a must. So when we communicating engagement, for example, working papers should provide for the documentations and communications of results. So yung mga documents na yun, kailangan formal siya, malinaw, or naiintindihan. Formal reporting should suitably reflect an assignment's objectives and scope, including limitations to stakeholders' expectations, clear communication of results, syempre, and any limitations relating to a report's distributions and reliance upon it by other parties. Next is communications must be accurate, objective, clear, concise, constructive, complete, and timely. Ito yung requirements para sa internal audit to perform its work with suitable independence and objectively. Next is reporting audit observations are a key requirement for internal auditors, and the board and management expect internal auditors to be their eyes and ears about what is happening in their organizations, being an essential component in the system of checks and balances. These functions must provide assurance regarding sa governance and controls ng management at ng audit committee. Also, it should contribute to improve management and control as well as to organizational performance. Internal audit is neither an external checker of financial transactions nor an extension of the external audit function. It is different in that focuses on all business risk. So they trust the accuracy, completeness, and timeliness of the information. So beyond identifying and providing a laundry list of problems, audit clients expect internal auditors to provide timely, useful, relevant, and feasible recommendations. They inspecting financial statements to catch errors, misstatements, and fraud. Performing audit on systems, operations, and accounts, reporting audit findings, and recommending improvements. So they trust the internal auditors. These recommendations should help the organization restore the deficiency so it meets the performance expectations. So that is our presentation. Thank you for watching and for listening. We hope that you've learned. Bye!